Thumbs up. Okay, good morning, everyone. So we have this webinar for Azure Site Recovery Services. And today I'm your presenter, Elidas Kekis. So a bit about information about me. I am cloud consultant with Azure Cloud Consultant with Crayon. Have over 10 years experience in Azure and in general in IT. Worked for different large companies on different scale projects. I can mention maybe a few, such as Walt Disney Company, Story 9, Irish Defence Forces, and peacekeeping unit in Mali. What else? Canadian Music Licensing Association, Irish Music Licensing Association, Irish Rugby Association, and few others. So different projects in the cloud, different migration projects. So this is where I gained my experience. Okay, so let's start. Today about the agenda. So we're gonna go through the slides. We're at 30 of them, but somewhere around we're gonna stop and we're gonna do demo somewhere at slide 20, and we're gonna do demo. I'm gonna show you in action. I think it's gonna be much more interesting to see Azure Site Recovery in action rather than going through this dry theoretical stuff. But it is important. I need to explain. I need to cover all this as well. So first of all, let's start why business continuity and disaster recovery is important to your organization. So Microsoft has done in the field, has done a lot of research, not only Microsoft, but different other vendors and companies. So basically they identified four main areas which can impact your business severely, and you might not even recover from it. So you might lose your, on average, an organization is experiencing 4+ disruptions a year. Could be small ones, could be large ones. Also, recovery times are stretching from 1 hour up to 9 hours, and the cost disruption at the enterprise level can cost you even 1.5 million an hour, and 4 out of 10 businesses, they do not reopen after this. Or even if you reopen, customers might not be there. You'll be on your own. Customers will be shifted to your competitors. So also, when disaster strikes, it can damage your brand. It can damage your ledger, your financial well-being. It can damage your equity. So these are, to mention it is important, compliance. For example, your partners might refuse, your customers might refuse doing business with you if you're not compliant. And in many industries, let's take, for example, financial industry, business disaster recovery, business continuity and disaster recovery strategy and implementation has to be in place if you want to continue doing business and you want to be compliant and you want to pass auditing. In the next slide, so disaster recovery, it's not always caused by nature, not by flooding, especially where we are living, not by floodings, not by severe storms as happening in the United States, for example, and it can happen. It can happen because of hardware failure, cyber attacks. Ransomware can cost you over $10,000 a minute, even. Power failures, your power supply get lost, not because of your fault, simply your power supplier experiencing some issues. Network failure. So these are major areas which can cause a disaster for your company and data loss. Okay, let's talk about a bit about about the layers of infrastructure. I want to explain you about what is shared responsibility in the cloud. So when you're hosting your services on premise, completely on premise. I'm gonna use this laser, sorry. So I'm talking about this slide. When you're hosting your application on premise, so you're responsible for facilities, for security, for sourcing hardware, for updating, managing, and all other processes, for staffing, you name it. 100% responsibility is on your shoulders. But once you're migrating into the cloud vendor, in this case, let's see, Microsoft Azure, is offering you shared responsibility. So main pillars, let's see, cloud has three major services. I mean, pillars: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So the more you shift into the right, the more responsibilities you transfer to your vendor, to Microsoft, to Azure. So infrastructure as a service, let's take simple example as virtual machine. You're deploying in the Azure virtual machine. So it means that you don't have to worry about physical security. You don't have to worry about networking, storage, virtualization. But still, you need to worry about patching, updates, about your application deployment, and about disaster recovery strategies, for example. The more, as I said, the more you shift into the right, platform as a service. Next example would be Azure SQL. So in platform as a service in Azure SQL, let's say if you are shifting from SQL Server, from on-premise, you don't have to worry about high availability in here, because Azure is providing you geo redundancy. For example, you can replicate your data between regions. Is patching your server. Is the only place you need to worry is your application data. And then the third one is a software as a service, where Microsoft is basically taking 100% responsibility on their shoulders. So application as Office 365 or Azure Active Directory. So you don't have to worry. You just need to create a user. Everything else is taken care of. Okay, so if we look into, so what is resilient foundation? So as I mentioned, Microsoft is investing a lot. Microsoft is providing you a foundation for your disaster recovery strategy. So Microsoft is investing into the data centers globally, into networking, into the development and maintenance processes, into software patching. So this is what Microsoft is building, a foundation for your disaster recovery strategy. It offers you geo redundancy. You can fail over between regions and so on. So next above the resilient foundation, resilient services. So what Microsoft is offering you, such as Azure Site Recovery service, disaster recovery tool, is offering you high availability tools such as load balancers, traffic managers, front door solution, DDoS protection, firewalls, and so on. So, and on the top of that, on resilient foundation, resilient services, this is where your application is coming in. So also for application part, you are responsible for code quality, for your application lifecycle, and application security. So these are three pillars, let's say, or three areas. Two of them are provided by Microsoft. Microsoft guarantees that you have foundation, you have tools, but you need to know how to manage them. You need to take them and manage them yourself. Of course, with some Microsoft involvement and help. Okay, so when it comes to disaster recovery planning, you need to look into available options. So in general, there are basically three options, let's say: disaster recovery, backup, and high availability. In some cases, you might need all three, 1, 2, 3, but in some cases, it depends on your application. You might need only disaster recovery, or only maybe backups would be enough. Or if you have some really critical application, so disaster recovery and backups is not enough, and your application needs to be highly available 24/7. But in some cases, you might need all three. If we cover just quickly, briefly, each of them, so disaster recovery tools and disaster recovery strategy, it helps you to recover from major failures, let's say, from if all data center, is it on-premise or cloud data center goes down. When it comes to the backups, so backups, use of the backups is when your data gets corrupted, you need to restore at small scale. You need to restore a single or multiple applications, multiple workloads, and your workloads are not so critical. You can avoid data loss, and you can avoid some downtime. And when it comes to high availability, so this is where I'm gonna touch that, I think, in next slide. When it comes to high availability, so this is, I'd say, most expensive, but this is when your application needs to be up 24/7. And next slide, let's talk a bit more. Okay, so what is high availability? So when it comes to the application, high availability is when you need to keep your application hot or active. That means that your application is getting deployed in let's talk from the Azure point of view. It needs to be deployed into 2 regions and load balance between them. So your application, this way your application gets always available, and it's quite, as you need to run constantly 24/7, you need to run identical resources in the cloud, so it can come quite expensive. And when it comes to disaster recovery, such as Azure Site Recovery tool, this strategy would be that your data gets replicated into the cloud. For example, is it on-premise data center? Your data gets replicated in the cloud, and it's sitting there. It's waiting until disaster strikes. And once disaster struck, you can do failover, and this is only when you start paying for the compute resources. You still, while data is replicating, you're paying for the storage and for recovery services, but the cost is, compared to high availability cost, it's much more less. Okay, I put up the slide. I think it is important to understand how Microsoft is protecting your data and how Microsoft is ensuring that your data is resilient. So picture on the right is a typical, this data center is the Irish Dublin data center called North Europe, Azure North Europe. Don't ask me why this data center was opened 2009. I think it was first data center in Europe. And don't ask me why Microsoft named it as North Europe. Maybe that time architect was very good in IT, but bad in geography. But anyway, that's all joke. And this is typical data center in Dublin. So not each data center, but most, Microsoft has around 64 data centers globally. Most of them are built out of 3 buildings, let's say 3 buildings, but technical term would be availability zones, 1, 2, 3. And in here you would see 1, 2, 3. So each building has its own power supply unit, each building has its own cooling units, and each building has its own networking system, access levels, and so on. This is how Microsoft, this is kind of fourth layer, how Microsoft physically is protecting your data. Once data gets replicated into the region, It's not a laser, I picked up pointer, sorry. Once data gets replicated into the region, so your data, I'll give you an example here about Azure storage. Once data gets replicated into the region, so Microsoft is replicating your data across the availability zone. So it is maintaining three replicas in each availability zone. This is called local redundancy service. For your own safety, if you select global redundancy service, Microsoft guarantees that these three copies, they're getting replicated across to another data center in, let's say, each data center in Azure, in Microsoft architecture, data center architecture, is paired with some other region. So, for example, Dublin data center is paired with Netherlands, Amsterdam data center. So your three copies of your data, if you select geo-redundant storage type, gets copied to Amsterdam. And if Dublin data center goes down, your three copies are still available in Amsterdam. So this is important. When it comes to production, there is general recommendation. When it comes to production workloads, your storage has to be geo-redundant. It's slightly more expensive, but if you go local redundant, Microsoft, well, most likely data center will never go down. But we are talking here about disaster recovery, disaster once the major disaster struck. So it might happen. Okay, so Azure Site Recovery Service. So what Microsoft has to offer? Microsoft to implement and to deliver your disaster recovery strategy in the cloud, Microsoft has Azure Site Recovery tool. So Azure Site Recovery is a platform as a service offering, and it offers you data replication between cloud and cloud, between on-premise and cloud, and between on-premise to on-premise. So Azure Site Recovery is acting as an orchestrator between the two data centers. So it is easy to deploy and manage. You'll see later in my demonstration, and it can significantly reduce your disaster recovery costs compared to high availability setups if you have one. Minimize downtime, and also it works with different hypervisors and different environments such as VMware data centers, Hyper-V. Physical servers can be replicated, and Azure VMware solution can be replicated. If we go into a bit more technical stuff, so Azure Site Recovery has two parts: so data part and management part. So data plane and management plane. So for the data plane is a Azure storage. In the background, there is an Azure storage and managed disk and data transferring. So data transfer is always encrypted in transit and at rest. Azure Site Recovery is creating a recovery points, which based on your disaster recovery strategy get deleted from 1 day up to 15 days. So automatically they are managed for you. Also, Microsoft is offering data compression in transit. So once data is being transferred from your data center into the cloud, it's being compressed by 50%. So if we talk about management plane, Microsoft, you have availability to authenticate with multi-factor authentication. Microsoft is offering with different levels of access control, of role-based authentication control, where you can give users read, write, owner permissions. Also, monitoring solution is where you can transfer ACR logs into log analytics, and you can monitor your ACR build different alerts on it and different dashboards and so on. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is at very high level. At very high level, this is how ACR works. So as not a standard, but always you have source region and target region. Source region can be your on-premise. Target region can be Azure Cloud. Source region can be on-premise. Target region can be another on-premise data center. Again, source region cloud, target cloud. ACR service in the middle. And ACR service, it is important to mention that ACR service is an orchestrator. It maintains only metadata of your all disaster recovery setup. It never intercepts your data. It never filters. It never scans, and so on. So in simple, based on this high level design architecture, let's call it so. Azure Virtual Machine source disk, they're getting replicated into a target region every 5 minutes for VMware and every 5 minutes for Azure, but for Hyper-V it's every 30 seconds. I'm gonna cover this in the next slide. Okay. So what is most important? What is most, when it comes to your disaster recovery strategy, what is most important? Most important is to answer yourself, to put it on the paper, and to understand RPO and RTO. RPO is recovery point objective. Recovery point objective means how much, when disaster strikes, how much data you can lose. So this is important. Can I lose a minute of my data? Can I lose 5 minutes, an hour? Or you might say, oh, I cannot lose any data. Okay, if you cannot lose any data, that's fine, absolutely fine. There is a solution, high availability solution, much more expensive. So you need to reconsider your financial things. And yes, it is possible not to lose basically any data. And recovery time objective then, how quickly you can recover from the disaster. So is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes, 1 hour? So these are most important 2 topics. This is you need to discuss and you need to have as a policy. Okay, and key features. So key features of Azure Site Recovery Service. Azure Site Recovery Service is offering such as there are basically two major policies. Is it crash consistency and application consistency? I think I'm gonna speak later in next few slides. Also, Azure Site Recovery, is offering recovery points. I already mentioned it's creating every 5 minutes recovery points for crash consistency. For crash consistency crash means that it's creating a snapshot, but the snapshot means that like your computer is being pulled out of the socket. So this is your in-time snapshot. What happened on the disk? Snapshot was made. For app consistency, and in most cases, it is enough for DHCP servers, file servers, for Active Directory servers, for many regular workloads which are providing services to your whole infrastructure. For application consistency, it means that all your data has been what was available on the disk that time is being saved, plus in-memory data and all transactions. So if you need to back up your application, your SQL servers, always on availability. That's the policy you should go with Azure Site Recovery. So crash and application consistency, 2 policies. There is another one, multi-virtual machines, but depends on crash and application consistency. So based on these crash or application consistencies, ACR is creating recovery points. So once you have recovery points, I'll show you later in the demo, you can do test failovers. Recovery points are being maintained from 1 up to 15 days. Used to be 72 hours only, but a couple of years ago, Microsoft improved on this part. And now from 1 day up to 15 days, you can go back. But obviously, it costs you 15 times more to maintain 15 days recovery points. Do you need them? In most cases, if we move aside a bit from the slide, in most cases, it's enough 1 or 3 days. It depends what disaster recovery strategy you have, how quickly you can recognize the disaster struck. I'm not talking about natural disasters, flooding or fire. You would notice right away. But I'm talking about if on Friday you locked your office and you went home and you don't have any alerting system or if you don't have an alerting system, and you're experiencing power failure. So on Friday you left office, on Monday you're coming back. 2 days are gone. So this is what you need to think as well. So 3 days, I'd say recovery point would be kind of very useful. Okay, ease of use. Yeah, so Azure Site Recovery tool gives you an option to set up disaster recovery very quickly from a virtual machine. I'll show you later. I didn't build virtual machine, so I'm gonna build virtual machine from scratch. I'm gonna show you in the browser how from virtual machine management blade how you can enable Azure Site Recovery. Also, I'll show you in Azure Site Recovery tool itself how you create all the recovery steps. Automation support, and you can automate some steps. Important to mention, Azure Site Recovery needs to be triggered manually. You need to press that button. There is no way to automate this one, but you can automate all other tasks from the sequence way virtual machines are being brought up to automation tasks, way they configured public IPs attached, DNS records changed, and load balancers created, and so on. Auto upgrade of ACR agents. Yes, this feature is enabled by default, and you don't need even to worry. So ACR agent, each virtual machine, for example, let's say VMware or Hyper-V in your on-premise, once you set up a ACR appliance in on-premise, mobility agent gets installed. So this is what it's talking about. Your ACR agent is updated automatically. You don't have to worry. And performance. So our recovery point objective of minutes. So Microsoft is not, for this part, I need to mention, Microsoft does not provide recovery point objective. SLA for recovery point, SLA for recovery point objective, Microsoft does not provide. SLA for recovery time objective, it is 2 hours. Never seen that. It would stretch up to 2 hours. Usually it's normal recovery time is 8-7 minutes. It depends on your VM size and disk size. Disk size is how many disks you have. But average is 30 minutes if virtual machine or your failing over farm is quite big. So continuous replication, yes, so your data gets replicated from on-premise into the cloud storage, into the managed disks, and out of these disks, out of these recovery points, you are building a new resources in the cloud. And compression, already mentioned that data transfer from on-premise into the cloud is getting compressed by 50%, so you're paying 50% less for inbound data. Okay, so additional features, yes, this additional feature, important to mention that recovery plan is very good and important feature. So if you need to recover one virtual machine, so recovery, you don't care about basically recovery plan, but if you need to recover a multi-tier virtual machines, for example, such as SharePoint Farm, which has web front server, which has applications server, and SQLite backend. They are load balanced, and SQL will always on availability setup. So this is where recovery plan comes in use. With recovery plan, you can orchestrate the way virtual machines are being built in Azure and the way they're being boot up. So if we take again SharePoint Farm, if you bring up your web front server first, your farm won't work because it needs a backend. It needs actually Active Directory needs to be brought up first, then SQL Server, then app tier, and then web tier. So the recovery plan helps you to automate all these steps. Deployment planner. This is a deployment planner tool. That tool you can run it before. That tool helps you to understand the state of your on-premise, let's say, of your VMware or your Hyper-V environment. You install deployment planner, you run it. It will give you information such as your network throughput, as your how many ACR tools do you need if you have quite large environments. So you might need several Azure Site Recovery tools. It is supported, and also what type of storage. It will recommend what type of storage do you need. Is it gonna be premium based on SSD, or is it gonna be just standard? And private link feature, so it allows you to create. So it allows you to, from your on-premise, it allows you to send data across VPN or across express route. So data won't be traveling through the public internet. Private link allows you to have private connectivity to Azure services. Okay, so I already touched these 2 points, but let's talk a bit more. So crash consistency, snapshot of all data on disk. So this is where it happens. Crash. So once you're selecting, in Azure Site Recovery, once you creating your site recovery plan, once you starting protecting your virtual machines, crash consistency is enabled by default. So this is what I mentioned. In most cases, most scenarios of your disaster recovery strategy, crash consistency is enough. Applications nowadays, they can recover from such let's say pull out plug out of the socket scenarios. So crash consistency is creating 12. It is creating 12 snapshots an hour, and after 1 hour, all snapshots get burned, and then only one snapshot is being retained. So in that 1 hour, you can select out of 12, and then after 1 hour, you can select 1 hour snapshot. Then again, 1 hour. So this is if you have 1 day retention policy. So you're gonna have 24 available 1 hour snapshots. Okay, application consistency. Yes, this is for the databases. For most cases, is a SQL Server. So it happens every hour, and it takes all the data on the disk and in transit and in memory. And multi-VM consistency means that crash or application consistency applied to a group of virtual machines. Okay, this is more industry-leading performance. Yes, so in most cases, this is what I mentioned, that 90% of failover happens in 10 minutes. And I've seen from if virtual machine is small size. Small size means that operating disk 128 gigabytes, when regular Windows virtual machine. So it fails over. Excuse me. It fails over in less than 10 minutes. That's for sure. And 99.9 completed in 30 minutes. Yes, again, can be 30, can be 15, can be, depends on how many disks are being attached, what sort of virtual, how much data do you have. And also it depends on the consistency policy you selected, because crash consistency recovers your virtual machine much more faster than application consistency. For application consistency, it has to wait until all in-memory data and transaction data went into the disk, and then it fails over. Time to resolve downtime is you see Gartner statistics. So time to it can be different from organization to organization, from application to applications. So time to resolve on average without Azure Site Recovery is 1 hour and a half, and with Azure it's only 30 minutes. So it's statistics, but most likely true. Average data recovery window before ACR, so 11 hours, and with ACR 4 hours. Yeah, that's true. I think 11 hours. If you lose your data center and you don't have any infrastructure as code, if you don't have your environment coded, I'd say 11 hours. If you have many servers, could be very challenging to recover. Could be 11 days, I'd say. So what supported? So 32 terabytes disk size are supported for the data disks, and 4 terabytes for the OS disks. Up to 64 data disks per virtual machine can be attached, and version 2 storage in the cloud supports 750 disks. If you go over that limit, you create another storage, so it's limitless. And how many virtual machines you want to protect, again, it's limitless, but each subscription has a limit of 3,000 disks per subscription. But again, if you go over this limit, you get another subscription, and you continue successfully. Extensive, okay, platform support. So Windows versions, it's not mentioned in here, but Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10 is supported as well. Linux distros, Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu up to 22 now, needs to be updated here. SUSE, Oracle, and Debian, and also VMware vCenter up to version 8, I think, supported, and Hyper-V virtualization hypervisor. All versions are supported. Also in Azure platform, managed disks and encrypted storage is supported. So and managed disks, in most likely, if you're new to Azure, if you're new to cloud, so you won't see them, you won't face them on managed disks. These are old versions of managed disk, and nobody's using them anymore unless you have really old workloads running, which you already had to migrate. Okay. So Azure to Azure, this is what we're gonna do demo on today. And so it's a high level, let's say, diagram. And this is how it looks on the diagram. So if you have 2 virtual machines, you have agents, mobility agents installed with managed disks attached. Virtual machines are deployed into availability set. Availability set, this is a Microsoft's, again, Microsoft process or assurance that if you deploy 2 identical virtual machines into availability set, it means that your virtual machines are spread across different racks. And when it comes to patching, when it comes to installing updates, Microsoft ensures that your virtual machines, they never get patched at the same time, they never get rebooted at the same time. So this is, again, important part of your disaster recovery setup. If you have multiple VMs, they have to be in the availability set. So virtual machine disks, they getting replicated into the cache storage, into the managed disks, and then when you initiating failover out of cached storage, out of these managed disks, Microsoft is building new disks based on these new managed disks. Virtual machines are being brought up. And this is VMware architecture. It's not identical, but it's very similar, except that there is additional layer in your on-premise VMware environment, VMware network. You need to install Site Recovery appliance, which is acting as a processing server. So it recognizes what you have in your network. Obviously, what you want to be identified and recognized, it recognizes, and it allows you to it takes care of the processing data into the cloud, into the Azure. It's Windows. I need to mention it's Windows OS virtual machine. Okay, this slide, I like this slide more because of this diagram, which I'm gonna quickly explain after. But so we need, I'll explain a bit about pricing structure. So Azure Site Recovery cost comes out of two parts. So if you go into Azure Calculator, you'll see that Azure is providing calculation only for Azure Site Recovery services. So if you put in, let's say, 20 servers, and you'll get cost of your 20 servers with 20 for Azure to recover to Azure, it's going to be 23 euros per virtual machine. But this cost won't be accurate. It's going to be only ACR licensing. In the background, what you need to estimate, you need to calculate your storage cost. So what gets replicated, how much data gets replicated into the Azure, this needs to be taken into account. And so this is, let's say, pre-failover. These two are storage cost and ACR licensing. These are pre-failover costs. And once you do failover, once you do your farm or server failover, this is when your compute costs come into play. So you have your on-premise environment down, and you have your Azure environment up. So you have in addition to your licensing and storage, so you have additional 6 servers up and running, public IP, which is not too expensive. But again, this is what you need to estimate when it comes to when you failed over, compute cost and networking cost comes into play. Networking is not that significant, but compute, yes, it depends on your VM size, database licenses, and so on. So talking about this diagram, kind of like it. It's very good representation of a failover structure. So I'd say this diagram represents a standard SharePoint farm with 2 database servers at the back, app servers in the middle, and the front serving public requests, user public requests. So all virtual machine disks, they get replicated into Azure, and they sitting waiting until disaster strikes. Once disaster struck, you initiating failover. You have identical setup in here based on your plan. So Microsoft Azure Site Recovery will build virtual machines, but load balancer, public IP, and DNS failover has to be and must be automated. So based on your already discussed planner, you can set up public IP load balancer and the traffic manager DNS failover. That will significantly speed up your failover RTO time. Okay, and ACR features. So these are features available with ACR tools. So recovery plan, already discussed policies. So you can attach different policies. You can, let's say, attach attach Azure policy, which would say that, okay, only that size virtual machines or only in this region virtual machines can be deployed, only that group of users can have access, and so on. So that's the policy is taking care of the governance. Deployment Planner, already mentioned, it's a tool which helps you to scope your on-premise VMware Hyper-V environment, which allows you to gather information, what do you need for successful failover. Encryption, data encryption in transit at rest. You can exclude, once you have data replicated, so you can include and exclude the data disks. So it's not that you replicated virtual machine with 3 disks and you cannot do anything with it. No, you can add and remove disks. PowerShell, so certain tasks can be achieved with PowerShell. Zonal redundant, later I'm going to explain zonal redundant. Already it is related to this diagram. So it is related to this part. So zonal redundant can be done within data center, within data center. It's a disaster recovery strategy, but in some companies, they require this. Some companies cannot move out of certain data centers and of certain locations. Some companies might need their applications to be at the very proximity. So this is where you should consider their zone redundant strategy. But in case all Azure data center goes down, that's not, you won't be recover from this. You won't be able to recover from this. So private links mentioned already gives you an opportunity to connect privately through VPN or express route. ARM templates, ACR resources can be deployed and scripted with ARM templates, which ARM templates are native Azure resource deployment with code templates, infrastructure as code. Proximity placement group, proximity placement groups. This is what I mentioned when I showed you in this data center slide. So proximity placement group means that some applications are latency sensitive, so they have to be as close, let's say virtual machines and their tiers, they have to be as close as possible to each other. So once you put your virtual machine into proximity placement group, Microsoft guarantees that your virtual machines are as close as possible, maybe in the same building, in the same rack, different hypervisor, but as close as possible to reduce latency. Hot add disk, already mentioned, and automated runbooks, yes. So you can automate certain tasks. You cannot automate failover, but you can automate tasks during the failover process. So synchronize your tasks. Okay, we're doing great here. Okay, so any questions so far? You want me to elaborate on something or something that concerns you? Site recovery, Azure in general. Okay, so I'll take it as a no, that everything is clear. Okay, I need a minute to, if you excuse me, I need a minute to now to set up my demo. Okay. Okay, can you see me? Yes, can you see Azure Site? I need someone to forward something.
Yes, Holiday. Yes, Holiday,
Oh.
I can see. I believe everybody can see.
Okay. So yesterday, being time cautious, because first time when you are replicating, when you are protecting virtual machine, it's taking a while. It's could take up 30 minutes, 40 minutes, so we don't have time to do that. So what I've done, I've created already demo vault, which is Azure Site Recovery service. Let's go quickly through it. So Azure Site Recovery Service gives you an opportunity, an option to, as I said, to replicate virtual machines from on-premise to cloud, from cloud to cloud, and from VMware infrastructure, Hyper-V infrastructure to Azure. So if this is landing page of Site Recovery, so as you see, if I need to replicate only Azure virtual machines, I can enable replication from here. I'll show you later. So if I need to set up VMware and replicate VMware replication from on-premise, I go into this part, and for Hyper-V, I go here. So if you go to VMware, let's say setup, prepare infrastructure, you'll be giving an option to download OVA file. Based on this OVA file, you'll be able to build a virtual machine in your data center, which is a processing server or so-called appliance. Microsoft has modernized this all the process. Used to be target server, processing server, discovery server, many parts, but now Microsoft has put everything into one. It's much more easier and straightforward setup. Okay. So what I've done, I've started replicating yesterday, and today morning started setting up, because as being time cautious, we wouldn't be able to finish all the replication process from building virtual machine up to failing over both directions. So if I need to replicate Azure virtual machine, so it can be done from two parts, from two places. So it can be done from virtual machine itself, and also it can be done from the recovery service vault. So if I go to replication, I'm going to show you later. You don't have to go here. Now, I'll show you my setup, and I think I'm not sure how experienced you are in Azure, but I'm gonna show you quickly how to build, because we have time. So I'll show you quickly how to build virtual machine from scratch, and I'll show you how to initiate protection, and then I'm gonna do a replication with already pre-built virtual machine, as protection is taking a while. First time protection, it's taking a while. So if I go into the resource group, I need to filter quickly here. So these two resource groups, they represent two regions. So West Europe in Netherlands, and they are physically in West Europe in Netherlands, and North Europe, which is Dublin. So in North Europe, in Dublin, I've created a network called Dublin. I've created a virtual machine, Guinness virtual machine, which I'm gonna fail over later to West Europe region. So already protection is enabled, and it's replicating. So as you see, that's the managed disks I was talking about. This is a managed disk. Virtual machine is getting replicated. This disk is getting replicated into this. So based on this disk information, what's in that disk, virtual machine on the other end will be created. Okay. So, and West Europe, data center. As you see, there is nothing in here except all disks did not remove. So we have a demo account, demo service vault, automation account, which was created automatically. It is required by vault, and storage account. So storage account has all the replication metadata, nothing else. So let's try. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a virtual machine. I hope my internet won't let me down. Yesterday it dropped down in the evening, dropped down to 1 megabit per second. And I have 1 gigabit per second, so won't be mentioning my internet service provider. Okay, so we have resource group North Europe. We're gonna name it as demo test rep. Demo test rep. We're gonna go north. We're gonna go north. Availability options. So as you see, Microsoft is giving you possibility to create availability zone, skill set, availability set. So, but it is not important at this time, as we are creating only a single VM, demo VM. So we're gonna select standard here. We're gonna go with Windows, which is not DS size. So in here you have possibility to select different sizes. So as you see, Azure policy is restricting me from going crazy and selecting some GPU size virtual machine, which could cost company thousands a minute or an hour, let's say. Administrator, did this. Allow selected ports. So standard. Okay. Premium SSD only for very sensitive applications. Operational disk is required as premium SSD. Good practice is to select standard SSD. It gives you better IOPS than regular SSD. Actually, same IOPS but better performance. Networking. I'm gonna put it actually automatically. It is recognizing virtual network deployed in that resource group, Dublin Virtual Network, subnet Guinness as well. We don't need public. We won't be connecting to this, so we don't need public IP management. Leave standard here. Monitoring, not important. Can disable. If we disable boot diagnostic, it will create a storage account automatically with some ugly GUID number. So if you want to control that, especially in production environments, so you simply disable that or actually enable with your own custom account, pre-created storage account with a correct name. Tags are important. As you saw in previous steps back, I was able to filter my resource group and find quickly resource group based on this demo tag. Now, so it's giving you price. In price, what's included? It's OS license. Windows OS license is included in price as well. So if you need virtual machine quickly in the cloud, you don't have to worry about licensing. You just build one and you're running legally. Let's check metadata quickly standard. It will take, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes, up to 5. Shouldn't take too long. Virtual machine, small size. Linux VM, it's taking around 2 minutes to spin up. Microsoft has improved on this part actually. Used to virtual machine deployment used to be around 5 minutes. Now it's in most cases much faster. As well, it depends on some regions. But we are talking here about seconds, not significant time difference. If any questions regarding virtual machines or storage accounts, replication. Okay, actually, while we're waiting, we don't have to sit and look into this. Oh, you see, very quickly, actually, very good. You take 2 minutes or so. There, okay. Go to resource. Okay, as I mentioned, we won't be doing replication from virtual machine, but as you see in this management, in this menu slide, not menu slide, menu blade, sorry. In this part, you can enable disaster recovery. You can enable backup, and you can enable disaster recovery. Actually, backup and disaster recovery, it is important. If you have disaster recovery, it doesn't mean you have a backup. It means, yes, your data gets replicated, it's backed up, but still, for quickly, if you need to restore your data from local problems such as human errors, for example, application coding was poor. You don't have an application lifecycle in place, and you need to recover quickly. So backup is important. So they both complement each other. Backup and disaster recovery, they are part of the same vault, and they complement each other. Okay, so by default, as you see, it has this really nice graphic. So it says that, okay, from Dublin, we are offering to replicate to west coast of West US, west coast in California. We are not California, can't remember which one is somewhere, Seattle, I think. But yeah, so West US, it's offering you to replicate, but as we are European Union countries, because of GDPR, most likely you won't be able to replicate because of the legit things. So here you can select any region, any available region what is been offered by Microsoft. So in our case, but we'll be selecting West Europe. So as you see, from Dublin, I would go to Amsterdam. Oh, what else here? Poland Central. Oh, what's that? Look. Never tried. That's a bug. This is, you see, Poland Central. This is where I think that's China. This is where. Okay, I need to report to Microsoft. That was funny. Never tried, to be honest. That was here you go. We found a bug. So okay. So replication can be enabled from here. So if I go into advanced settings, then basically you can do exactly the same, and Microsoft will pre-create a Azure Site Recovery service, storage and all that. Everything will be done for you, and well, disaster recovery enabled on virtual machine in minutes. But if we have large scale deployments, large scale environments, this is where we need to go. We need to use Azure Site Recovery Service Vault. So it's going to be discarded. Okay. So replicated items. If I go to replicated items, I can see my Guinness virtual machine already protected, which I prepared. We're gonna do failover on that virtual machines. But to replicate the one we've created, so I go to Azure Virtual Machine. I select North Europe region, resource group. Need to find my virtual machine. So as you see, this demo test rep virtual machine is available. I go click, I select West Europe, I select pre-created. If I do not select pre-created resource group, Microsoft is gonna give me one, but we want to select mine. And already, once I selected the created West Europe resource group, in that West Europe resource group, I have virtual network already pre-created with failover subnet. So it identifies automatically and it's giving me. I can select any other virtual network, but this is how I want. This is where I want my virtual machine to be replicated. I can control IP addresses. Okay, and 24 hours retention policy. Again, you can create new one, can be up to 15 days as ACR managed. So, okay, automation account, again, I can pre-create one or I'm gonna use already created in previous testings, let's say so. Okay, this is metadata and enable replication. So let's give a minute. Refresh. Now, as you see, this is what's happening now, enabling protection. So now Microsoft is enabling protection. As you see, it's gonna go, well, it's gonna take up 15, 20, something like in the area of 20 minutes. We don't want to wait, we don't have time. So once we'll come back maybe later just to see that everything succeeded. So it's gonna replicate. So then it's after enabling replication status, it's gonna go into synchronization status. Synchronization means that it's gonna synchronize your existing data from source into the target. So if you go here, latest recovery points. So what it does is syncing and it's creating already mentioned recovery points. So I have latest recovery point done 1009, one discount of one. So I'm able to select any of these, but the latest one is this one. So app consistency is not available as I did not enable it. And by default is crash consistent, which is in most cases is enough. Okay, so never perform successfully. So this is what it means, never perform. That means that test failover, it's an optional step, but it's highly recommended. And once you have data successfully replicated, you're new to the tool, you're not familiar with the setup, you're not familiar, you need to identify a recovery time objective. You need to understand how quickly it's gonna recover. So that's your button. Oh, sorry, not that's your button. That's your button to do test failover. Test failover is recommended to be done into a separate network, not into the same network. Once you have, let's say, once you have live replication, you can continuously do test replications. You can train your staff. You can experiment with recovery times with different farm setups, how long it's gonna take to recover, how much data, and so on. Excuse me. And yeah, so different has to be for test recommended. You can do test failover in the same network. If I select same network, map, it's gonna give me a warning that it is recommended that the network selected to test failover different. So, but if I do test failover into the same network, it will allow me, but make sure you destroy that before do a real failover. Otherwise, you'll make a mess out of your disaster recovery strategy or environment. Okay, so we're gonna do failover here, real failover, skipping test failover, which is not recommended. I already mentioned. So you need to do test failover first and real failover. So continue. You see, I understand the risk of skipping test failover, continue failover. So Microsoft is constantly reminding you, keep doing things right. Don't skip. So optional thing for test failover, for real failover, we can, okay, this button. So imagine this is I'm already simulating when disaster already struck. You don't have your data center. So there is nothing to shut down. Virtual machine does not exist. Your environment gone. That's it. Over. So this is only if you want to, let's say, if you want to, if it's planned failover. For example, it can be even migration. It can be migration project. If you want to migrate, actually, I forgot to mention, yes. So Azure Site Recovery can be, in some cases, can be used as a migration tool. So you can you can replicate virtual machines into Azure, do failover, shut down everything, and that's it. You have your environment replicated, up and running, migrated in Azure. So do we want? Let's keep it running. No harm here at the moment. So failover. You see two buttons. One to tick the box. That's it. Failover happening. 10:14 in progress. So this is how simple it is to initiate and set up failover. So this is now failing. Now this is failing from Dublin data center into Amsterdam data center. Once we have that failed over, next step will be to reprotect West Europe Amsterdam virtual machine. Reprotecting means that it will start that virtual machine is live, and it will start replicating data back into your data center or North Europe region. So once we have that reprotected, then we can do failover back. Once your, let's say, you restored your data center, you are happy, and you can failover back to your data center. Or in some cases, let's say if you have a cloud, only cloud solution, you have two data centers. So you can see them as, as independent data centers, or as if you fail over from one to another, and you can successfully continue running in one, disaster struck in that one, you fail over to another one. There is no need to, if there are no some sort of business policies or business requirements that you need to run in specific data center, you can run in both even data centers. Even in some cases, if your application, when you're experiencing peak times for your application, you can have two regions up and running. You can quickly fail over virtual machines, identical virtual to additional region, and you can have additional resources serving your peak times. So, okay, so 2 minutes. Start failover in progress. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the slides as I call blah 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 slides left. Where are we? When did we finish? Okay. Yes, so each of them already I explained. So this is the recovery plan. These are key features explained in slightly more detail. I can touch them. So key features are next to be explained. So recovery plan, as I already mentioned, you can orchestrate your virtual machine build up and configuration during the failover process. Actually, that's well, failover has finished. I need to go back. So that was quick. Let's see what was done. Okay, as you see, Stars Replica virtual machine finished in standard small size virtual machine, 128 gigabytes of operating system disk. It failed over in 3 minutes. So it's, I'd say, not bad result. So if we go back to our site recovery and we go to replicated items, as you see, failover completed. As I mentioned, yes. So this one, so it's synchronizing now. Demo virtual machine is synchronizing. So now, if we go into failover completed, I'll have, as I mentioned already. So now we have. I need to show you, otherwise you won't believe me. So North Europe Guinness virtual machine, and West Europe. That's our new virtual machine replicated. That's the one we just replicated in 3 minutes. So it is identical virtual machine running in West Europe region, what we had in North Europe. Okay, if we go back to the tool, replicated items, go back, failover completed. You log into, won't be logging in here, won't be attaching public IP, don't have VPN set up with that environment, it's just a demo. So if I go to so next step is important, so I need to reprotect. Reprotect means that, again, I'll initiate West Europe virtual machine reprotection back into the disk in North Europe. It will start syncing whatever changes we are making to virtual machine, whatever data we're adding to virtual machine gets replicated. That task is gonna take a while, so we can go back now. I'll keep monitoring, because what it does, it's exactly what needs to be actually. Reprotect, but it should be syncing now. I'm sharing on my laptop, so it's the menus now. I did not save something because, sorry. So, okay, why don't do this to me, reprotecting virtual machine? It is reprotecting, apologies. Okay, while it's reprotecting, let's go back to, I didn't press button properly or something. Demo gods. And now again. Finish here. slide, this one. Okay, so recovery plan as well. So you can orchestrate your deployments, you can automate them, you can add, as you see from this plan screenshot. So we have virtual machines added into the groups, and between them you have automation steps which are creating load balancer. It's my laser. You have steps creating load balancer, adding public IPs, and so on. So zone-to-zone disaster recovery, again mentioned before, they're in the same data center between availability sets, availability zones. You can have your disaster recovery strategy. You can replicate virtual machines between 1 or 2 or 3 availability zones. It doesn't protect the against complete region failure, against absolute data center failure, but in some cases it might be required. Deployment planner, this is a user interface. Once you run deployment planner, as you see, recovery point object, it gives you different information about your data, about your storage type, size, about networking, how many virtual machines can be, not compliant, compliant, and so on. Private links, again, it's a private. So Microsoft is recommending, well, in general, architectural networking architecture in Azure, it is recommended to have a hub and spoke topology. Hub and spoke topology means that you have a hub network which serves as a entry point into your whole environment, into all your all other Azure networks. So hub network in front, linked or paired with spoke networks. So private links allows you to connect through VPN express route privately and send data not through Wild West internet, but your dedicated line. Encryption, again, encryption is available, in transit and REST. And also it is supported encrypted disks, failover of encrypted disks is supported. Automation, again, so you need to kind of good practice, what I'm doing here in the browser. So that should be okay, your starting point, testing environment, and so on. But when it comes to production, so you need to look into infrastructure as code. You need to integrate your ACR appliance into your pipeline. Your policies can be automated. Again, PowerShell, yes and no. I don't know if there are other tools you can use for configuration and setup. ARM templates as a native, let's say Terraform, if it's a platform agnostic coding tool. So ARM template is a Azure native based on JSON templates, and automated runbooks. They allow you to automate and different processes, building load balancers, IPs, storages, virtual machine configuration, enabling updates, setup updates, and so on. Disk support already mentioned. So managed disks, well, unmanaged disks you don't have, let's say, unless you have some left, but you don't have to worry. So you can include, exclude, and replicate them. And that reprotection is still happening. So didn't press something. Proximity placement group already mentioned that Microsoft, once you place your virtual machine, application-related virtual machines into proximity placement group, it means that Microsoft ensures that your virtual machines are hosted in the rack or in different racks, but as close as possible to reduce latency within the data center. Okay, and some more slides of the best practices, recommended best practices. So best practice, let's say, if you have money, if you can spend, and if you have mission critical applications, best practice is it's either to have all three. So minimum, let's say minimum, if we It's not covered in these slides, but as a minimum, if you cannot afford, let's say, if you cannot afford disaster recovery, if you cannot afford backups, if you cannot afford high availability, so your minimum disaster recovery strategy should be infrastructure as code. That will, instead of doing ClickOps, instead of, let's say, if disaster strikes, you have 100 virtual machines, how long is gonna take for you to recover, to recreate them in the browser? It's honestly, I do not imagine such task. But if you have your infrastructure coded, if you have everything in ARM templates or in Terraform, so it can take, let's say, 10, 20 minutes, and that's it. And your environment is back, cheap and quiet. If you have integrated this in your pipeline, your environment is back up and running. So that's infrastructure as code as an option to, let's say, disaster recovery tools. But when it comes to more automated manner and mission critical applications, so high availability and disaster recovery, proper backup strategy is important, and you need to prioritize this. RTO, RPO considerations, again, this is where your backup disaster recovery strategy starts. You need to identify RPO and RTO targets. If you don't have them, you don't have backup strategy. You need to understand how much data you can lose. You need to understand how quickly you'll be up and running. Capacity considerations, best practices. Okay, so Microsoft capacity considerations. Most subscriptions has hard limits, but in most cases you won't reach them. And also Microsoft guarantees when it comes to Azure Site Recovery. Microsoft guarantees that capacity is there. If you have really big environments, so multi-subscription architecture is important to be considered, and also there is a possibility to allocate resources for your subscriptions. If you know what this is what we need, let's say some data centers, they have limitations of virtual machine tiers. So when it comes especially to standard to SSD disks, but so this is where you need to pre-plan. You need to think about resource allocation. Will it be enough to spin up 1,000 or 2,000 virtual machines in that data region quickly? Microsoft needs to know that and plan as well. Health and monitoring. Okay, so it is possible to integrate, not possible, but yes, so you can integrate and enable logs, ACR log streaming into log analytics. And from all analytics, you can, based on Custo queries, you can retrieve data related to your failover and all over and related services. Azure's networking. Already mentioned hub and spoke topology. So one of the strategies, you can pre-create networks as you saw. I had Amsterdam network pre-created, so I selected that. Also, it gives me a control over IPs I want to use. I can, let's say if you need to, you cannot retain same public IP. So this is where DNS change comes in place, but you can maintain identical private IPs. What you had in data center, let's say in on-premise data center, you can have an identical networking setup in Azure environment, except that you cannot have them both running and live at the same time. But when disaster strikes, your data center went down, it means these IPs are not available, they won't get in conflict. So on the Azure side, you'll be able to use the same virtual machines with the same IPs. Disaster at scale. So yes, well, integrate the infrastructure as code pipeline, ARM templates, script your failover in the plan, and so on. Okay, and this is additional information, useful links, but all of them you can find them by Googling Azure Site Recovery something civil, some similar keywords. Okay, I see that reprotection is finished, and my slides are finished as well. Let me quickly share my screen again. Now, as you see already, so I did reprotection, as I said, so it is synchronizing the first virtual machine, waiting for first recovery points. So what it does, it is creating recovery points which are not available yet. So only first time it's taking a while. After, it's every 5 minutes, every 30 seconds in Hyper-V environment. So this is what we've done. So we've done reprotecting. So Guinness virtual machine is synchronizing active location. As you see, instead of North Europe, what we had, it is West Europe. And it's gonna take a while. I doubt we'll be able to wait until maybe, but I'm not sure. Unless you have loads of questions, we can stretch this out until 11. But this one will take around 20 minutes or so. So next step would be exactly the same process. That would be failover. I would have to go failover, and I would failover to the North Europe region. That would be the whole process if I need to go back to my data center from West Europe. Okay, so I'd say I'm open for questions if you have any. Okay, so I don't know, silence means silence means that either I was very boring or it was so clear that that's it, everyone will go Azure Site Recovery. So I'd
Second
say
option, of course.
Second option, very good. So Linda, how do you think, can I stop recording?
If you finished everything, basically, yes, and maybe someone has questions. If not, so we can finish, wrap up, and basically recording is done, so we will send to everyone.
So I'm stopping recording.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.